Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our reading of The Swiss Family Robinson. Today's chapter, The Tree House. Let's get started. When dinner was over, I prepared our night quarters. I first slung our hammocks from the roots of the tree, which meeting above us formed an arched roof, then covering the whole with sailcloth. We made a temporary tent, which would at least keep off the night damps and noxious insects. Leaving my wife engaged in making a set of harness for the ass and cow, whose strength I intended to employ the following day in drawing the beams up to our tree, I walked down with Fritz and Ernest to the beach, to look for wood suitable for building our new abode, and also to discover, if possible, some light rods to form a ladder. For some time we hunted in vain. Nothing but rough driftwood was to be seen, utterly unfit for our purpose. Ernest at length pointed out a quantity of bamboos, half buried in the sand. These were exactly what I wanted, and stripping them of their leaves, I cut them into lengths of about 5 feet each. These I bound in bundles to carry to the tree, and then began to look about for some slight reeds to serve as arrows. I presently saw what I required in a copse at a little distance. We advanced cautiously, lest the thicket should contain some wild beast or venomous serpent. Juno rushed ahead. As she did so, a flock of flamingos which had been quietly feeding rose in the air. Fritz, instantly firing, brought a couple of birds to the ground, the rest of the squadron sailing away in perfect order, their plumages continually changing as they flew from beautiful rose to pure white, as alternately their snowy wings and rosy breasts were visible. One of those which fell was perfectly dead, but the other appeared only slightly wounded in the wings, for it made off across the swampy ground. I attempted to follow, but soon found that progress was impossible on the marsh. Juno, however, chased the bird, and seizing it, speedily brought it to my feet. Fritz and Ernest were delighted at the sight of our prize. "What a handsome bird!" exclaimed they. "Is it much hurt? Let us tame it and let it run about with the fowls." Fritz and Ernest then carried the birds and bamboos to the trees. While I proceeded to cut my reeds, I chose those which had flowered, knowing that they were harder, and having cut a sufficient quantity of these, I selected one or two of the tallest canes I could find to assist me in measuring the height of the tree. I then bound them together and returned to my family. "Do you mean to keep this great hungry bird Fritz has brought?" said my wife. "It is another mouth to feed, remember, and provisions are still scarce." "Luckily," I replied, "the flamingo will not eat grain like our poultry, but will be quite satisfied with insects, fish, and little crabs, which it will pick up for itself. Pray reassure yourself there, and let me see to the poor bird's wound." I procured some wine and butter, and anointed the ring, which, though hurt, was not broken. I bound it up, and then took the bird to the stream, where I fastened it by a long cord to a stake, and left it to shift for itself. In a few days the wound was healed, and the bird, subdued by kind treatment, became rapidly tame. While I was thus employed, My sons were endeavoring to ascertain the height of the lowest branch of the tree from the ground. They had fastened together the long reeds I had brought, and were trying to measure the distance with them, but in vain. They soon found that were the rods 10 times their length, they could not touch the branch. Hello, my boys, I said when I discovered what they were about. That is not the way to set to work. Geometry won't simplify the operation considerably. With its help, the altitude of the highest mountains are ascertained. We may, therefore, easily find the height of the branch. So saying, I measured out a certain distance from the base of the tree and marked the spot, and then by means of a rod whose length I knew and imaginary lines, I calculated the angle subtended by the trunk of the tree from the ground to the root of the branch. This done, I was able to discover the height required, and, to the astonishment of the younger children, announced that we should henceforth live 30 feet above the ground. This I wanted to know, that I might construct a ladder of the necessary length. Telling Fritz to collect all our cord and the others to roll all the twine into a ball, I sat down and taking the reeds speedily manufactured half a dozen arrows and feathered them from the dead flamingo. I then took a strong bamboo, bent it, and strung it so as to form a bow. When the boys saw what I had done, they were delighted, and begged to have the pleasure of firing the first shot. No, no, said I. I did not make this for mere pleasure, nor is it even intended as a weapon. The arrows are pointless. Elizabeth, I continued to my wife, can you supply me with a ball of stout thread from your wonderful bag? Certainly, replied she. I think a ball of thread was the first thing to enter the bag. And diving her hand deep in, she drew out the very thing I wanted. Now, boys, I said, I am going to fire the first shot. I fastened one end of the thread to one of my arrows and aimed at a large branch above me. The arrow flew upward, bore the thread over the branch, and fell at our feet. Thus was the first step in our undertaking accomplished. Now for the rope ladder. Fritz had obtained 2 coils of cord, each about 40 feet in length. These were stretched on the ground side by side. Then Fritz cut the bamboos into pieces of 2 feet for the steps of the ladder, and as he handed them to me, I passed them through knots which I had prepared in the ropes, while Jack fixed each end with a nail driven through the wood. When the ladder was finished, I carried over the bow a rope by which it might be hauled up. This done, I fixed the lower end of the ladder firmly to the ground by means of stakes, and was all ready for an ascent. The boys, who had been watching me with intense interest, were each eager to be first. Jack shall have the honor, said I, as he is the lightest. So up with you, my boy, and do not break your neck. Jack, who was as active as a monkey, sprang up the ladder and quickly gained the top. 3 cheers for the nest! He exclaimed, waving his cap. Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah for our jolly nest! What a grand house we will have up here! Come along, Fritz! His brother was soon by his side, and with a hammer and nails fastened the ladder yet more securely. I followed with an axe, and took a survey of the tree. It was admirably suited to our purpose. The branches were very strong, and so closely interwoven that no beams would be required to form a flooring. But when some of the boughs were lopped and cleared away, a few planks would be quite sufficient. I now called for a pulley, which my wife fastened to the cord hanging beside the ladder. I hauled it up, and finding the boys rather in my way, told them to go down, while I proceeded to fasten the pulley to a stout branch above me, that we might be able to haul up the beams we should require the next day. I then made other preparations, that there might be no delay on the morrow, and a bright moon having arisen, I, by its light, continued working until I was quite worn out, and then at length descended to have our supper. On a cloth spread out upon the grass were arranged a roast shoulder of porcupine, a delicious bowl of soup made from a piece of the same animal, cheese, butter, and biscuits, forming a most tempting repast. Having done this ample justice, we collected our cattle, and the pigeons and fowls having retired to roost on the neighboring trees, and on the steps of our ladder, we made up a glorious fire to keep off any prowling wild beasts, and ourselves lay down. The children, in spite of the novelty of the hammocks, were quickly asleep. In vain I tried to follow their example. A thousand anxious thoughts presented themselves, and as quickly as I dispelled them, others rose in their place. The night wore on, and I was still awake. The fire burned low, and I rose and replenished it with dry fuel. Then again I climbed into my hammock, and toward morning fell asleep. Early next morning we were astir, and dispersed to our various occupations. My wife milked the goats and cow, while we gave the animals their food, after which we went down to the beach to collect more wood for our building operations. To the larger beams we harnessed the cow and ass, while we ourselves dragged up the remainder. Fritz and I then ascended the tree and finished the preparations I had begun the night before. All useless boughs were lopped off, leaving a few about 6 feet from the floor, from which we might sling our hammocks, and others still higher to support a temporary roof of sailcloth. My wife made fast the planks to a rope, passed through the block I had fixed to the boughs above us, and by this means Fritz and I hauled them up. These we arranged side by side on the foundation of boughs, so as to form a smooth, solid floor, and round this platform built a bulwark of planks, and then throwing the sailcloth over the higher branches, we drew it down and firmly nailed it. Our house was thus enclosed on three sides, for behind the great trunk protected us, while the front was left open to admit the fresh sea breeze, which blew directly in. We then hauled up our hammocks and bedding and slung them from the branches we had left for that purpose. A few hours of daylight still remaining, we cleared the floor of leaves and chips, and then descended to fashion a table and a few benches from the remainder of the wood. After working like slaves all day, Fritz and I flung ourselves on the grass, while my wife arranged supper on the table we had made. Come, said she at length. Come and taste flamingo stew and tell me how you like it. Ernest assured me that it would be much better stewed than roasted, but I have been following his directions. Laughing at the idea of Ernest turning scientific cook, we sat down. The found scuttled round us to pick up the crumbs, and the tame flamingo joined them, while Master Nips skipped about from one to the other, chattering and mimicking our gestures continually. To my wife's joy, La Salle appeared shortly after, and was presented with all the milk that remained from the day's stock, that she might be persuaded to return every night. For, said my wife, this surplus milk is really of no use to us, as it will be sour before the morning in this hot climate. You are quite right, I replied, but we must contrive to make it of use. The next time Fritz and I return to the wreck, we will bring off a churn among the other things we require. Must you really go again to that dreadful wreck? Said my wife, shuddering. You have no idea how anxious I am when you are away there. Go we must, I am afraid, I replied, but not for a day or two yet. Come, it is getting late. We and the chickens must go to roost. We lit our watchfires and leaving the dogs on guard below, ascended the ladder. Fritz, Ernest, and Jack were up in a moment. Their mother followed very cautiously, for though she had originated the idea of building a nest, she yet hesitated to entrust herself to such a terrific height from the ground. When she was safely landed in the house, taking little Franz on my back, I let go the fastenings which secured the lower end of the ladder to the ground, and swinging to and fro, slowly ascended. Then, for the first time, we stood all together in our new home. I drew up the ladder with a greater sense of security than I had enjoyed since we landed on the island, offered up our evening prayer, and retired for the night. And that would be all for today. I'll see you all next time. See ya!